Alternative paths can be hard to find. To light them up, we need alternative voices to guide us on our way. And that's the subject of my talk. What do I mean by alternative voices, and where can we find them? What are the voices our young people hear most often? What shapes their journeys most fundamentally? Home, school, peer group, society, and often in our neighbourhood, they have the same common thread. Football is for boys. If not crime, then grime. Success can only be measured through academia. A youth centre is a space where alternative voices can be heard, can create new possibilities. Girls can also play football. It isn't just crime or grime. Success can also be measured by doing what brings you peace. When I met one young boy, Joseph King, or J. King as he's now known, he was starting on a journey that could have been prescribed by the world around him. But he found a place that offered something different when he came to a youth centre in the heart of LadbrokeGrove. Certainties from the wider world around him were challenged within the walls of the Lancaster Youth Centre. Like many others before and after, he saw that there was one door into the centre, but many paths out. The youth centre had a fully equipped recording studio. Young people could come and go freely. For King, that studio became a hothouse for his creative mind. He became an explorer there, given space and time to think and create and grow. Every Monday at 3 p.m, young people could call and book the studio sessions for the week ahead. Every Monday by 3:15, King had booked all the sessions he was allowed. And after every session ended, King would find a way to need a little bit more time. He was always the last one to leave. He was given new tools to find his own alternative path. He was given time. He was given freedom to explore his creative abilities, and now he is an artist in his own right, earning a living from art, part of a movement that's creating a new genre of visual art. He headlined his own solo art exhibition. His art is exceptional. He is exceptional. His journey to an alternative path should not be an exception. That is something we should offer to everyone. So let's explore why. Why give all young people the opportunity to hear a youth worker's voice? Let me walk you through a space like the Lancaster Youth Centre. Activities were creative and varied. Young people with all different abilities accessed the centre. Cooking was a must in the evenings. I have seen food bring together youth workers and young people like nothing else. Access was voluntary. Young people chose to attend. This shaped the boundaries for how they behaved within the centre. Young people set their own rules. What I noticed was this: the rules they set themselves, they upheld. They could explore who they wanted to be without judgment, within safe boundaries. They took part in co-designing their service. We celebrated their similarities and listened when they spoke. Unrealistic, some critics said. Not like the outside world, I was told. They were right about that, at least. But what we were doing was not trying to simulate the outside world. It wasn't ever meant to be a puzzle for them to solve. The outside world is already full of adult-led interventions for young people that just don't work. We were creating space for understanding, for young people to learn about themselves, to learn what rules even mean. If every single day of your life people are telling you who you are, you start to believe it. Previous research has found that peer-to-peer influence is ignored in interventions with adolescents when trying to make positive changes to behaviour. Interventions aimed at adolescents are most likely to result in behaviour change when they afford adolescents respect and autonomy and account for what they value. What the research says about peer influence makes my case. It's why I believe in the youth worker's power in being that alternative voice. I have seen it in youth spaces all over the world. I have seen what happened to a generation of young people in one area who took the alternative path. On the 4th of August 2011, I was working at Lancaster Youth Centre. A man named Mark Duggan was fatally shot by the police. Friends, family, local people began to rise in Tottenham, and soon protests spread. Not just across London, but across the United Kingdom. Official reports written about the events of that summer all focused on all the reasons for the violence. They followed only well-worn explanations for young people's anger. Poverty and areas with a historic negative relationship between young people and the police were the most important indicators behind the violence. Lancaster Youth Centre is in the shadow of Notting Hill. There has been historic mistreatment of young people by the police that goes back to the 1950s. And at first glance, Ladbroke Grove may appear affluent if you only looked at the shiny, colourful houses off Portobello Road. Yet, in one local ward alone, 76% of households suffer from at least one form of deprivation. Education, income, health, or housing. If there was a borough with all the right ingredients for young people to be angry, you might say this was it. But that's not what happened. What happened was this. Over that same period when parts of the country were experiencing elevated levels of crime, Kensington and Chelsea were second bottom of the table in London. Why? Let me tell you what I saw, and I acknowledge we didn't reach everyone. And although we saw so many angered by what happened, young people didn't destroy property. Not here. We, the alternative voice, went out to the streets. And young people here reached out to each other with us. In the United Kingdom, the 80s politician Norman Tebbit is famously known for telling the country to get on their bikes, referring at the time to unemployed young people. I don't think he quite had my youth worker colleagues and me in mind, but on our bikes we were. And we cycled the streets and walked the streets because these were our young people. They were part of our community. And we knew in that moment that they needed to hear an alternative voice to help light up an alternative path. So for 4 nights that summer, during nationwide protests, we just went out and talked with young people. We were there with them, acknowledging the injustice they felt, and we encouraged them home. How did we know they would listen? We didn't. We had to use the relationships we formed to at least try. And I believe that our voice made all the difference. Ladbroke Grove didn't look like the rest of the UK in August 2011. Now we're 10 years on, and not a single serious look has ever been taken at what went right those nights. The Riots, Communities and Victims panel produced a report, a 150-page report. Just 1 paragraph and 1 case study is devoted to those who did not riot. 1 paragraph, 1 case study in 150 pages. As a community, we saw the reasons why. Time invested in celebrating our young people at a local level over many years gave the community a better outcome. But as a society, we're not ready to look. Public discussion was all about the violence and the mob. There was not a mention of all those who, with all the same prompts, were not violent. The story of the youth worker in me was inspired by the alternative voices I heard growing up in London. I found myself fully embraced in a new community here in Ladbroke Grove after coming here from Iraq. Settling into a new community as a refugee was not as scary as it might have been, as it is now for so many. Play workers and youth workers, all with an alternative voice guiding me. Peer connections that I made in those years influencing me positively. Connections made, built on services, bringing young people together through commonality, in celebration of our backgrounds, not in spite of them. And I am not alone. The West London that raised me was a community that cared more for our similarities as young people than our differences. On June 14th, 2017, the area that I grew up in became the focus of international attention after the Grenfell Tower tragedy. We saw young people come together to help and support their community, and those of us from here were not surprised. It's always been those play workers and youth workers who walked with me without judgment, lighting up my alternative path, that inspired me to light the way for others. Good youth workers have had good youth workers. Chad, who I met as a young boy obsessed with music and football, was a regular member of another youth centre in the south of the borough. Set up very much like Lancaster, it gave him a space to create and shape his interests. He formed friendships and explored his talents freely. One of the friendships he formed continued to lift him long into adulthood, alongside many other positive friends and family. Chad knew King. King created art, Chad played music. The positive peer influence they had on each other began to create opportunity. They developed the art of sounds. They regularly hosted music and live art at the Notting Hill Arts Club. Chad the DJ, King the artist, sold out every time. Peer-to-peer influence, motivating and inspiring success. Chad's career as a radio host and DJ lifted by peers that believed in him. He took his alternative voice, coined a phrase that laughed at the irony of young men like him all of a sudden being popular culture, reclaiming his story through language at a time when he personally found love and became a father. He was the happiest I had ever seen him. In the summer of 2019, Chad was diagnosed with a rare form of cancer. He fought till the end. Last year, he passed away, leaving behind a legacy of youth work that was committed to raising the ambitions of young people. I don't doubt that the lives he inspired to take an alternative path are already inspiring the way for others. I have spent 20 years working with communities to celebrate the voice of young people. I've travelled to over 50 countries, and this is a certainty that I have seen over and over. When you light the path for others, others light the path for those behind. I was lucky to have a space to hear an alternative voice, but you don't need the building if there's not one. It wasn't the bricks that made Lancaster Youth Centre, it was the people inside its walls. If we are committed to improving outcomes for young people, different to those we're seeing today, we need to tell the stories of their successes. We need to let the alternative voice be heard so that we can light the alternative path, so that they can influence and motivate each other. For now, we know this. Alternative paths can be hard to find. To light them up, we need alternative voices to guide us on our way. Thank you. And thank you to those alternative voices without whom I wouldn't be here today. My youth workers, Shola and Alan, the magic behind Lancaster, Mick, Sabina and Russell, and to my best friend and biggest peer influence, Christian Parker.